Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I begin by, on behalf of my right honourable and honourable friends, wishing our deepest sympathies to the family of Baroness Thatcher, to her children and to her grandchildren. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, also for recalling Parliament. It's the right thing to do in this chamber, which she dominated for so long, that we, the representatives of the people of the United Kingdom, should meet here to pay tribute, but also to reflect on her long period in office. Baroness Thatcher was many things, Mr. Speaker. She was a pioneer, as has been said, the first female leader of a major political party in the United Kingdom, and the first female Prime Minister. She did break that glass ceiling, but she also broke through the social barrier standing in the way of anyone at that time and generation from becoming the leader of a major political party. She was a woman of personal and political courage, a politician of formidable ability, but a stateswoman who transformed not only the United Kingdom, but also played an enormous role in changing fundamentally the world order. Of course, there are many who disagreed with her, even within her own party, and those of us who are Unionists in Northern Ireland disagreed with her on occasions, particularly in relation to the Anglo-Irish Agreement. But whatever our views, people today, by and large, must accept, acknowledge and admire her as a politician, a statesperson of conviction. For her, the days of focus groups, the amorphous middle, the soft imaging, none of that would have suited her. How many times have we heard it said during her lifetime and since that, like her or loathe her, at least you knew where Maggie stood, and people admire that in their politicians. And that's certainly something that people want to see. Part of her attraction was that she was seen as taking on the vested interest, the political establishment. She was impatient of the old brigade, prepared to shake things up. But like all great human beings and all great politicians, she was a woman of contradictions. Very often her rhetoric didn't match up to the actions. Her instincts were blunted. She did become persuaded on some issues against her better judgment. On Europe, she is rightly lauded for the action she took, for instance, in relation to securing our rebate, for her stance against European federalism, for her Bruges speech, for her stance in defence of our currency. And yet she did sign and implement the Single European Act, which many see as the forerunner of the Maastricht Agreement. And on Northern Ireland, again, she was full of contradictions. Those of us in these benches in the DUP, and indeed the entire Unionist community in Northern Ireland in the 80s, opposed the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and indeed many honourable and right honourable members on the Conservative benches and others opposed it as well. Once she had said that Ulster was as British as Finchley. Once she said rightly that it was out, out, out to a united Ireland, a federal Ireland or joint authority. And yet a year later, in 1985, she signed the Anglo-Irish Agreement without any consultation with the entire Unionist community and without their consent. The reason that so many Unionists felt so strongly and spoke so strongly at that time, and that there are still strong feelings about that era, is that they remembered her strong stance during the hunger strikes, when she stood up in defence of democracy and against terrorism, when she had suffered the loss, as the Prime Minister and others have referred to, of her close colleagues due to terrorism, when she herself just a year before had survived an IRA assassination attempt, and yet she was persuaded to sign the Anglo-Irish Agreement. I am glad that in her later life she came to recognise that that was a mistake. That just as Lord Powell, her former close adviser, said the other night in Newsnight, it said of Mary, Queen of Scots, that the words Calais were inscribed in her heart, so he believed that the words the Anglo-Irish Agreement would be inscribed in the heart of Margaret Thatcher, because she became increasingly disillusioned with that agreement. People say, but was it not the template for the future that we now have in Ulster? I say it isn't that template, because you can't base a future on exclusion. And I say that as a Unionist in Northern Ireland, with all of our history. We must go forward with the inclusion of all communities. And today there's very little of the Anglo-Irish Agreement left Today we have a settlement in Northern Ireland which has been consulted and has the consent and agreement of both communities in Northern Ireland. And I'm glad that that is now what we have, as opposed to the previous approach. Mr. Speaker, I want to close by saying that we had our disagreements, yes, with Margaret Thatcher, but she was fundamentally, instinctively and truly a great patriot, a great unionist, a great Briton. And that is why we are right to pay tribute to her today, recognising her faults, recognising the divisions that are there. Of course, there are divisions, but there were divisions long before Margaret Thatcher, and there will be divisions long after in other eras as well. It is not unique. I hear today Gerry Adams and others talk about the legacy of Margaret Thatcher as if she and the British government, the British state, created the violence in Northern Ireland. The fact is, of course, that the hunger strikers were in jail and were convicted of terrorist acts long before she came to office. And those who are out on our streets in Belfast and elsewhere in the United Kingdom, in Glasgow, Bristol or wherever it is, engaging in the sort of ghoulish celebrations, obscene acts which I think appall the entire nation. They should think again of her words, because she once said that she took great solace in those who hated her so much, because she knew then that she was doing what was right and that they hated her for that. Mr. Speaker, we must remember Margaret Thatcher for the great things that she has done for our country, not remembering her with rose-tinted spectacles or through rose-tinted spectacles, especially those of us in Ulster. But it is right that we do mark her period in office and her life as being one of enormous contribution, an everlasting memorial to democracy and to freedom in this country and across the world.